this evening as we unpack this very important topic. Today, we wish to cover the topic Dress to Deceive, trying to unpack the environmental cost of fast fashion. And we have amazing speakers who are doing amazing work in their different corners um, on um, on the environmental cost of fast fashion. And I just want to start by introducing myself. My name is Noxolo Mfocwa. Nox, I am the advocacy campaigner for the Fossil Ad Ban campaign at Fossil Free South Africa. And I will be moderating this conversation for us today. I'm here today joined by four amazing speakers that will be speaking. I think Les will be joining quite soon. But we have here with us Helen, we've got Tegan, and we've also got Sophia. Lazola we're just waiting for her to join. I don't know, is Sarah here as well? Okay, Sarah as well. Sorry, my bad. I think I'll start by just going through the bios of the speakers that we have here with us today. I'll just read through those so that we know who we'll be speaking to. And then I'll get into the order of how we'll be doing the business for today. Starting with Safia. Safia Karim is an intersectional justice activist with a particular focus on the fashion industry, its role within the South African economy. She currently lectures fashion history and business studies at Fedisa Fashion School and represents South Africa in the global fashion revolution movement, serving as both a director and a co-country coordinator of the local chapter. Safia is passionate about transforming the fashion industry so that it is more circular and ethical, prioritizing people and the planet over growth and profits. Safia completed her Bachelor's of Social Sciences in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics at the University of Cape Town in 2017, and her Bachelor of Commerce Honors in Economics from UCT in 2018. She has also completed 2 short courses in garment construction from the Cape Town College of Fashion Design in 2017, and she is currently enrolled at Stellenbosch University pursuing a postgrad diploma in sustainable development. Safia hopes to use her passion and experience to mobilize the sustainable fashion movement within South Africa and contribute towards a broader societal change. Welcome, Safia. The second person I'm going to introduce is Sarah Hendricks. Sarah holds a postgraduate degree in media theory and practice from the University of Cape Town. She is a lifelong learner and a goal-oriented individual who is passionate about challenging conventional practices and fostering sustainable development through multimedia storytelling. Her education has taught her that the more you learn, the more urgent the need to find solutions become. Fashion is her lens to understand systemic injustices, and she aims to inspire people to look beyond the fabric, to see fashion as both a lens and a solution to these injustices. Her research explored how fast fashion brands navigate and too often exploit sustainability narratives through greenwashing tactics, perpetuating the corrupt cycle of profit-driven motives, pushing already vulnerable individuals into the margins further. And then we also welcome Sarah. We also have Tegan, who's joining us. Tegan Gibaut, I hope I got it right, is a climate justice researcher doing her master's in science with a thesis focused on the South African fashion industry. Beyond this, she's a grounded content creator and influencer who advocates for sustainable fashion, and beauty, as well as embracing nature and community. We also have Helen Kahaso Dina. Helen is an experienced project lead and communication specialist with a demonstrated history of working in the NGO sector. She holds a Master's of Business Administration and Project Management. Helen started her career as a communication assistant at Greenpeace in 2012 and rose through the ranks to become the project lead for the Pan-African Plastic Project. Taking on a permanent career change from being a banker, Helen has passionately worked to ensure that a better food and farming system exists for community, a reduction of plastic pollution in the environment, and to amplify the voices of those at the front line of environmental injustices. With extensive experience in environmental justice, Helen is a project lead expert with a passion for creating insightful projects and campaigns, and a communication strategist with a track record of collaborating with national, regional, and international media across Africa. Helen has exemplified good interpersonal communication skills, and excellent leadership skills, and a well-developed sense for responsibility. Welcome, Helen. Thank you so much for joining us. Last but not least, I'm going to introduce Lazola Kati. Lazola Kati is a social justice human rights campaigner with over 6 years of experience in project management, advocacy, and public policy, holding a bachelor's degree in the social sciences and a postgraduate diploma in international relations. Lazola has impactful national and global campaigns, has led impactful national and global campaigns on issues ranging from disinformation and digital rights to climate justice. She played a role in the landmark initiative such as the Oceans Not Oil campaign, which halted Shell's exploration of South Africa's coast and led Africa's first greenwashing complaint against Total Energies, resulting in a historic victory. With advanced networking and media skills, Lazola has collaborated with embassies and civil society across Africa, Europe, and Asia in advancing human rights and environmental justice. Lazola also serves as our project lead for the Fossil Ad Ban campaign. So she's also part of the team. I just think quickly before we get into it, some house rules. Can we please all stay muted unless one, you are a speaker that has been asked to speak at that time, or you have raised your hand for a question when we do our Q&A and you've been recognized, just to limit any interference as well while people are speaking, because there's a lot happening around everyone. So if you need to raise anything while a speaker is on, you're more than welcome to use the chat, and I will be watching over that, and so will Zandi. But also, yeah, I will indicate when we get to our Q&A, where it's open for everyone to raise their questions. So just to start us off, a brief introduction. Sorry, our dog is acting out. Okay, he's fine now. Just a brief introduction. So fast fashion is one of the world's most polluting industries, and it's tightly woven with fossil fuels, overproduction, and also greenwashing. So today we want to unpack how language, marketing, consumer culture all sustain the system and how we can shift it. So from whether you speak to social media influencers who are doing work for fossil fuel advertisers, or advertisers themselves, industry has really mastered the art of dressing destruction as sustainability. And our conversation seeks to explore that deception and also expose the real cost of these clothes, the real cost behind them. So I'm going to be starting with Tegan, and I have a question that's specifically crafted for you. And I hope you'll enjoy responding to this and just letting us in on some information. So, Tegan, social media drives so much of what we wear and desire. How do influencer marketing and online trends feed the fast fashion cycle? And how can the same platforms be used to promote sustainability instead?
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for letting me be part of this panel today, and thank you everyone for being here. Um, sure, a big question, and I'm sure I'm going to say something that is no surprise to everyone. We all know that the endless scrolling from a doom scroll to just a quick check here and there exposes us to everyone's content, and everyone has something to say. And a lot of those things that people are saying are buy this, buy that. So obviously consumption sells. It's easy for an influencer to pick up those ad campaigns. And what I think is interesting about the conversation is that we all know that overconsumption is all over social media. But what I like to do is I like to take a step further and understand where we can come to as how we can reach a solution. And obviously, this is the big discussion. How do we find a place where um, influencers don't, because especially in a Cape Town space, um, where influencers don't feel like they're being um, attacked, but rather we speak to them in the way that we are wanting to just move towards a better future. Sorry, my brain is not fully actually working. I'm realizing I've been thesising so much. I'm still waking up from away from that, so my words aren't really coming to me that well for this question. But I think so often we'll call out influencers and we'll say, "Hey, what you're doing is not that great," and we see that when it comes to Shein. We'll see it when it comes to other things. There's a lot of uh, brands that are being boycotted on our targeted boycott lists, and influencers will say, well, I'm just trying to make money, I'm just trying to pay my own rent. And I'm talking specifically in a South African context. We need to strike that balance with understanding how, as influencers, what our platforms mean. I always say that we're not just people, we're people with microphones, and we are amplifying messages, and we need to make sure that these messages are rooted in something other than consumption, because of course, as we know, consumption is leading to a lot of really, really bad things, not only for the planet but for also ourselves. But yeah, sorry, I think my brain is still kind of warming up, even though it's already so hot outside. Um, but yes, I think it's a thing we're all very common with. I mean, if anyone has social media, if anyone has Instagram, we see that overconsumption being pushed all the time, because there's always a new discount code, there's always a new trend, there's always something that we can buy.
Mm. Thank you so much, Tegan. I think those are very valuable contributions, and your brain is awake. I wanted us to talk about things that like are so common on social media, like maybe the culture of unboxing stuff and trends like that, um, and how that kind of communication, right, frames how people look at fast fashion and how it feeds into the cycle of, fast fashion. What are some of the other trends that you're seeing? You've spoken about discount codes that are always available to get people to buy something new. But what are some of the deceptive trends that you see that influencers employ on behalf of whoever's running that marketing campaign for a company?
Mm. Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, there's tons of marketing tactics, and I mean, just for also context, I come from a science background, like very research focused. There's a lot of people that work in marketing that I'm sure could also bring a lot into this topic. But just as a content creator and someone that interacts in that space, I see always the sense of urgency being pushed out. You need to have this. Run, don't walk. Oh, whenever I hear run, don't walk, oh, like shivers run down my spine. Um, there's always a sense of urgency being pushed, and that you need to get on these trends. But also, I feel like it's a lot more subtle. Um, there's Pilates, matcha, and hey, I like Pilates and I like matcha, but there's a certain aesthetic being pushed within the Cape Town content creator space, within the South African content creator space. I'm talking on a more national scale now. I think if we look at a global scale, there's just so many more external pressures and so many different things. I think it's easier to look at the microcosm of South Africa. There's an aesthetic that's pushed. Just for an example, the Pilates matcha, it's spoken about a lot on TikTok, this kind of aesthetic and this lifestyle, and it's very covert because it'll be seen as this is the standard, and like there'll be slight things here and there, like you need to look a certain way or you need to do this type of thing. And I think it comes down to it always comes down to consumption. You need to have a certain look about you, and that goes into your clothing and what you're buying and like all those different aspects. But it also comes down to body image issues and all of those things. I think influencer culture and social media really has such a power to be extremely detrimental. But yeah, so I think it's an overt thing of like, run, don't walk. I'm shouting in your face, like, there are these trends, you need this right now. There's discount, it's expiring soon. And then it's a more covert of, you want this lifestyle. I'm living this lifestyle. I'm portraying this lifestyle. And, you know, it plays into that insecurity that we have, especially as like a young woman. I will see that and I'll be like, ooh, I want to look that certain way. I want to seem like I'm that cool. So let me buy into it. And it's more subconscious. So I think those are two ways to that.
Thank you, Tegan. I love how you go into more of the language that's used and how, because all of it is really about like seducing you into getting into this thing or putting so much pressure on you that you feel that pressure. But I'm interested to know, is it possible for us to use this kind of communication to reframe these habits towards climate consciousness and consumerism that is at least climate conscious? Is there a way for us to say run, don't walk in the direction
to the next
of
climate conference?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad you asked this question because it's exactly in my master's research. I'm looking at the sustainable transitions within the South African fashion industry, and I've categorized social media. And in my thesis interviews, I've seen, okay, social media is both a barrier to sustainable fashion and sustainability, but also a driver. People are learning so much. I learned so much in 2020 COVID. We were all online. That's when I really got an idea of the impacts of fast fashion. You know, we had documentaries come out, and then people started talking about them on TikTok and stuff like that. So these platforms do have the power. I mean, it's just up to the person how they use it. I guess that is the real question. The only problem, though, is that I've noticed with the shifting of things, obviously our Instagram, Facebook, Meta is an American-based company. There's a lot more censorship around political content and climate content. And myself and a lot of really big climate influencers I've noticed are being, or maybe not myself, but because I'm much smaller, I don't think I have those impacts. I think the larger climate creators I've always been following are feeling quite a lot of censorship. So I also think there's a lot of nuances and complexities to using your platform for these kinds of topics. And that's why I think it's important that there's more awareness around it. And that's why that you should be doing it more, because we need to be talking about this, even if billionaires don't want you to talk about it.
Yeah, true story. I mean, I've seen in recent campaigns where activists are just fighting to not drown in those algorithms and pushing specific social media campaign with specific hashtags that are meant to use the algorithm to get somewhere in terms of our campaign. So it's really a true reflection of what's going on, that the messaging we try to put out there lacks effectiveness because we are not doing what the billionaires want us to be doing on their platforms. And if Tegan has shown us anything about the language of seduction into buying, our next speaker will help us see what's behind the label and who really pays the price. Our next speaker will be Safia. And I think my first prompt for you, Safia, welcome, is In terms of Fashion Revolution's work has exposed how little consumers know about who makes their clothing. What barriers do South Africans face in terms of choosing sustainable options? What are you seeing in that space?
Sure. So maybe thank you again for having me on this panel. And I think before I start, if it's fine, to just give a little context around Fashion Revolution and how we started. I think it's really important, particularly because our origin story is actually quite tragic. So Fashion Revolution started as a really just a call to transform the industry that has been exploiting garment workers and our planet, and it still is. So Rana Plaza is which was a collection of different office buildings and included a factory that housed several garment workers making clothes for some of the big fashion industries. The building kind of had these structural cracks on the 23rd of April in 2013, and people were sent home. However, garment workers were forced to come in the next day on the 24th of April, despite it being unsafe for them to work. And the building collapsed, and several garment workers, 1,134, lost their lives, and over 2,500 were injured. And it was a really, tragic incident in the fashion industry, one of the largest, factory disasters of the modern world. It's not the first time we've seen people lose their lives for fashion, and it's unfortunately not been the last time. And I think when we think of the issues of fashion and garment worker exploitation, we often like to isolate those things to India, Bangladesh, and China, and but unfortunately, we do have instances even in South Africa where garment workers have been exploited, particularly if we think of migrant workers and the informal economy. There are a lot of gaps within our regulation around how do we protect the people who are making our clothes. And even within that, so Fashion Revolution started because this disaster happened and it exposed the labels where the labels in the rubble, we could see who these brands were. And that was a turning point because it was only in that rubble that people were like, hey, I buy from this brand. And yet these were the conditions that the people were working under. And so that was kind of how our story started around transparency and who made my clothes, and to really humanize that process, to really bring to surface who these people are, and what their conditions are like as well. And then from there, it really just like spiraled because it's more than just that end process. When we think about fashion, I think we often can fixate on that part because that is usually the part that's a little bit more visible and easier to kind of track. But the supply chain is vast. It spans across various countries. There is that story that your T-shirt has probably traveled to more parts of the world than you have. Everything, is interconnected and fragmented at the same time. And so, yeah, I think from that, we've seen there's a lot of power in information, but that information is really just to help us connect the dots around what's missing and where progress needs to happen. So with regards to consumer awareness, I think in South Africa, I don't think many people are aware of Fashion Revolution or the work that we do. And even within that, it's still pretty challenging because it's just about transparency, what brands are reporting. It doesn't really tell us about, how sustainable or ethical they are necessarily. And I don't know if consumers are the consumer market is also very varied in South Africa. We also have to recognize people have different income brackets, what is their affordability like? I think the sustainability conversation is often seen as like a privilege, right? Like it's expensive to participate in that industry. At the same time, we know there are other markets and ways of participating in sustainable fashion through rewear, recycling, upcycling, thrifting, all of those things. But then they're also being co-opted by the middle class, and it's now becoming less accessible for those who it was actually designed for. And then there's also that conversation around conspicuous consumption, people who've been excluded from markets in the past wanting to show their wealth and status, even if they might not necessarily have the means or funds. And then, of course, people who do have the means and funds want to enjoy these goods that they couldn't have in the past. So it's really complex. And I think, similar with the whole greenwashing, not greenwashing, the carbon footprint conversation, trying to put responsibility on individuals to make more informed choices. It's a broader systemic issue where businesses, governments, policies, all of those things need to shift to make it more accessible for us to participate. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Definitely, yes. I mean, when you speak of what sustainability in general, just being pitted on individuals and how it's the individual's responsibility when the impact of, global companies in the space is like much, much bigger. And no one is speaking about that. And no one is speaking about the governments that are allowing that to happen in their countries. I think my follow-up then would be based on the tragic story you've just told us of how Fashion Revolution began its work. Are you seeing any of those trends happening here on the continent or in South Africa specifically, whereby when you look at some of the brands, maybe South African ones to be specific, you find that there are similarities in the way that workers are being treated in that industry? Is it happening over here as well? Or should we be continuously advocating for sweatshops to be, a thing of the past? Because I think when we do have this conversation, everyone is going to refer, as you were saying, to a sweatshop in Asia. But how does it play out here on home soil?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I've alluded to like some of the dynamics around migrant workers and informal labor in South Africa, which is a lot harder to regulate because they don't form part of the formal economy. So they can't unionize, they don't have access to, to negotiate for fairer wages and safe working conditions. But I do think, for the parts of the industry that are formalized and form under, the bargaining councils, South Africa is known for its really strong labor laws, right? And often that's also used as a conversation around why it's so hard to do business because of how strong our labor laws are. And I think that we definitely have better systems in place, I think, to protect workers in South Africa. And so if you are a fashion business, I do believe it is harder to exploit workers in the same way. Not to say it's impossible. And I think there are other issues, and I imagine the unions would be able to speak better to what some of those challenges look like. But from what I do know, they've had some major successes around, particularly during COVID. SACTU did some great work to ensuring that garment workers were still paid, I think it was 6 months, even though there was no work. Whereas if you look at like in Bangladesh and in other parts of the world, orders were placed but couldn't get shipped, and so people didn't get paid for that work even though they already did that work. So there is that difference there where we've had stronger protection for workers during like the pandemic. But the minimum wage in South Africa is still pretty low. And garment workers, like the sewing is not the easiest job, but also it's not the best for your health if you think of the fact that you're sitting the whole time. And we've also got issues around transport in our country. So there are other systemic challenges that we need to be thinking about. But outside of that, in terms of workers' protection, I think we definitely have more stronger policies here.
And any interventions that Fashion Revolution has been part of in trying to really get consumers to think about what is happening behind the label at a local level or maybe at a regional level? Is there any work we should be looking out for that's happening in that space?
Yeah, I mean, what's great about the work that we do or the position we have is that we do speak to various stakeholders, and there's a lot of work being done in the kind of advocacy space, particularly around policies and regulations, and thinking about what governments and in industry can be doing to better support a more sustainable and ethical fashion industry, and then also at the same time being able to speak to consumers and raise that awareness. But again, in our context, recognizing the complexity of the consumer market in South Africa, and not trying to make people feel guilty for their consumption choices, particularly where they are limited with their options. But most of, I think, our big work is around that transparency index, which we've now shifted actually to more looking at climate impacts and decarbonization and what the industry is looking to do. So there's a lot of research work that we've put out, and then trying to disseminate that to the consumer, and just raise that awareness. So from our side locally, we do a lot of workshops and clothing shops, really just bringing people together and getting them to understand how they can participate in this movement in a way that's accessible to them, but also empowering at the same time, like giving them skills like mending and those things as well. But across the continent, like we personally haven't done as much work with other Fashion Revolution teams, but I know that like in Fashion Revolution Week, which is our annual campaign, there were teams in East Africa and North Africa that kind of got together and did a few collaborations and events. And we're constantly thinking of ways that we can work together to have a more Pan-African approach around the industry. Yeah, but there's more work that we'd like to do generally, always, and more work to be done.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you so much for your insights. I think if there's one thing to be taken away from how you are intentionally trying to do your work, is to constantly recognize people's position in terms of accessibility and also privilege, and try to bring interventions that are sensitive to where people stand, right? And yeah, we truly appreciate the work and look forward to seeing more and more.
Yeah. Sorry, and just to add to that, like one of the biggest things we always like to do is really just to reframe the conversation as well, and our positionality. So it's not that you're a consumer, you're a citizen. And so really what we try to do is get people to see their power in the conversation, because I think the fashion system is designed to make us feel like we're these passive consumers. There's a sale, there's a trend, this is what you need to be buying and doing, you know, or the greenwashing tactics, this is good, so you can buy it. But really, we are active citizens. And so like a lot of our reports are there to kind of fuel activism. So the idea is that you can use that to start conversations with brands. So if, you know, we can see that only 10% of brands have some kind of commitment towards renewable energy, then like, you know, 10% of 250 brands, that's like, that's insignificant, and it's not going to shift the needle. But then you can see which of the brands are not that don't have those commitments. And then we've got tools embedded in our website where you can even email those brands and ask them to commit and have policies in place. So that's what we like to do as well. So even if you can't speak with your money, you can speak with email, social media, and use those platforms to really hold brands accountable.
Thank you so much for that addition. I think it's always great to leave that call to action there, so that we're not just giving people information, but we're also saying to them, this is how you can take action. And I think now we'll transition from talking about not consumer awareness, but citizen awareness, as Sophia has corrected us in this moment, to speaking about corporate accountability. Our next speaker's research dives into how brands like H&M continuously disguise overconsumption with green labels. Sarah Hendricks will be our next speaker. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think a lot of what Sophia's already said overlaps with my research, so I'm excited to get started.
Oh, no problem. So my prompt for you is your research looks at H&M's green advertising. How can consumers detect greenwashing in the so-called conscious collections that brands like H&M put out there? You can also briefly just, let us into a little bit about your research for those that have not had the chance to look into it, and then just let us know how consumers can detect this greenwashing.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about what Sophia said about the Rana Plaza. The opening lines of my thesis actually began with the Rana Plaza, and the complexities of the fashion industry, the overlaps between social, environmental, and political systems, and how fashion as a topic is so much broader than just the clothes we wear. So the title of my thesis is Detecting for Greenwashing in H&M's Green Advertising, How H&M Lures Conscious Consumption. So my research looks at how fast fashion brands such as H&M uses greenwashing. And greenwashing, for those of you who don't know, is a tactic that companies use to make false or exaggerated environmental claims to market themselves as sustainable, but in fact, the business model is corrupt and they continuing to harm the planet. So they're not actually making any real change. And greenwashing is a marketing tactic, right? So let me just quickly explain the difference between green marketing and greenwashing. So green marketing is supposed to communicate real meaningful change, right? And it means that the entire life cycle of the garment, what they're selling out there is genuine. But greenwashing exploits this green marketing tactic and uses language and imagery to evoke a sense of sustainability, but the business model is still corrupt. So in terms of how consumers can spot greenwashing, and this is the framework that I use to detect for the presence of greenwashing in H&M, right? I found two types of greenwashing. The first type of greenwashing is executional greenwashing. So executional greenwashing looks at visuals and sound, right? It looks within ads. So nature-related colors, for example, green and blue, images related to the natural world, such as forests and oceans. All of this can create an illusion of eco-friendly, of sustainable. So executional greenwashing, if I were to sum it up, it's sound, colors, images related to the natural world, or images related to environmental issues, biodiversity loss. The second type of greenwashing that I looked into is also known as greenwashing claims or the seven sins of greenwashing. This is a framework by Ted Choice, looks at textual or verbal elements. So, for example, using words like eco-friendly, sustainable, conscious. These words are just used blindly without actually having real proof or verification, right? And just to break down the seven sins, I wrote an article for Twig, which breaks down these seven sins and these different frameworks, which I can add in the chat. But for example, to give one sin, it's the sin of no proof. So the sin of no proof is environmental claims can't be substantiated because there isn't any real evidence. For example, the sin of vagueness. Environmental claims are just used loosely. These words are just, all this language are just, they're just thrown around without any real proof or verification to claim to be sustainable. Yeah, so I hope that answered two types of greenwashing. Executional greenwashing, which looks at visuals and oral elements, and then greenwashing claims or the seven sins of greenwashing, which looks at textual or verbal elements.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think you definitely gave us how we can detect this in a more visual sense, like just thinking of an H&M store on the inside, and how everything is just visually pleasing and colors are put in certain ways so that you can, make certain choices. I think the second thing I just want to ask you about is in terms of South Africa's economic challenges, how do affordability and unemployment shape how people respond to sustainable fashion messages?
Yeah, so this is a big one. And within my thesis or research, I looked at something called the attitude behavior gap. And the attitude behavior gap is when consumers, as we like to label ourselves, their values or intention to shop sustainably don't necessarily match their purchasing decisions, right? And why is this? What is the reason for this attitude behavior gap? And this actually opened up a lot of different doors, which jumped again linked to what Safia has already said. So I found within my research that affordability or price point is the major factor we have a fragmented South African economy, and the lower to middle income households are limited by their socio-economic realities to want to engage in sustainable consumption. They are worried more about issues such as putting food on the table, simply wearing clothes to keep warm. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. They're not really worried about issues such as greenwashing, you know. Another issue is accessibility. Fast fashion brands are everywhere, you know. You can go to the store and it's just convenient as opposed to a more sustainable brand. And then other cultural factors such as identity, style, and size, as well as the marketing of fast fashion brands versus slow fashion brands. There is a significant difference there, which plays a role into purchasing power. But the major one is affordability. And when we look at this implications, when we weave the link between greenwashing, the attitude behavior gap, and the sustainability framework in general, it's very big. So greenwashing, it manipulates this already fragile space between intention and action. So instead of closing that attitude behavior gap by empowering people to make informed decisions, greenwashing just widens that gap and it blurs the line between what is sustainable and what appears to be sustainable. And this really got me thinking about the sustainability framework. Why do we only limit ourselves to the consumer, you know, to shop more sustainably? And that is exactly what greenwashing does. And this just perpetuates the cycle of, you know, we need to buy into something that is sustainable. But fast fashion actually it just wants you to limit yourself to the consumer, limit yourself to, you know, Western ideals of consumption, looking at this through a broader lens. You know, the sustainability framework is not inclusive of a global South perspectives where the economic realities are actually more important, you know. They use green messaging that appears to global ideals but ignores local realities. And these fashion companies continue to sustain business models and keep the global South dependent on increased consumption patterns. And we see this through the global North and what they're doing with greenwashing. Yeah, so just to wrap up that, fast fashion brands, they navigate and exploit, you know, sustainability narratives through their greenwashing tactics, which perpetuates this corrupt, profit-driven motives, and it pushes this already vulnerable populations further to the margins. So yeah, oh no, that was a mouthful, but it just shows the link and how corrupt the cycle is, and how, you know, Western brands such as H&M push for consumerism. That's all it is. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think in the spirit of making more connections and moving through this line, so we've gone production to the advertising of it to how it looks in the store. I want to bring in Helen, right? Because Helen will speak to us about what happens when those clothes reach the end of their life, right? She's going to bring the community and environmental lens on this. Hi, Helen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Helen, Greenpeace Africa's report exposes how fast fashion waste impacts local communities in Ghana. What are the environmental and health consequences of this system?
Thank you for that question. Maybe just for context, we traveled to Ghana. This was 2023 to one of the largest, secondhand textile market known as Kantamanto in Ghana. And this market receives up to 15 million items of, clothing every 2 weeks. And so, we just wanted to see when this clothing gets to Kantamanto, what usually happens. So our research, unearthed a whole lot of, things that were actually shocking to us. So First of all, we did find out that, an estimated 500,000 items of clothing will end up as waste every week. And this now will be thrown into, open spaces, informal dump sites within the city, and some of it will actually end up in the beaches. So we also visited some of the dump sites in the city, and we found out that this kind of waste has now supersedes the capacity of the dump sites. And every evening you'd see trucks and several trucks leaving the city because now the dump sites are not able to contain the waste anymore. We visited the beaches, but also spoke to some of the traders. And the shocking thing is, most of these traders, of course, this is their source of livelihood, would open a bale, and a bale is just the packaging of the secondhand textile. And some of them would find that up to 40% of what is contained in that bale is not resellable. So we're talking about, items of clothing that are either torn, too soiled, not appropriate for, the weather in Ghana. For instance, they'll bring winter jackets. Ghana does not experience winter. It's very warm in Ghana. And so this now will not be able to be resolved. So one, there's the loss of income because you can imagine these traders have put in their, capital and income into this business, and then 40% of it ends up not being resellable. And we went ahead and also visited some of the some of the informal settlement. Like there's this one particular one that I want to make reference to called Old Fadama. So in this informal settlement, there is what we call public bath or public wash houses. And now because, the textile waste is too much, some of it is being used as fuel in these, wash houses. And we did sample the air within those public wash houses, took it to a lab, and the results show that there is some toxins that are actually carcinogenic, and some of them are up to 200 times the allowable levels, the Europe allowable level. So this is going to impact on the health of the workers, but also the people who take those public bath in those public wash houses. The textile waste is also impacting some of the fisher folks because in the beaches and in the sea now, they're saying that sometimes you catch more textile than the actual fish. So there is also the element of loss of livelihood for the fisher folks. A lot of this textile waste from the research that we saw, the fabric that is used to make these clothes is usually polyester nylon. About 89% of all the clothing that we sampled had, were made out of polyester. This ends up getting thrown in the beaches, in the dumping sites. Polyester is, it's plastic in layman's language, and that will further disintegrate into tiny particles or what we call microplastics. Plastic itself has been, shown to have, about 16,000 chemicals. Around 26% of these, which we're talking about 4,200, have been shown to be toxic. So we're talking about something that, we usually would not actually connect to toxins, ending up being toxic to the environment, but also to human health, because if this will end up in the marine ecosystem, it means that at some point, for those of us who love fish and other, marine food, we are ending up ingesting or eating a lot of these, toxic chemicals. So it's not just an environmental crisis, it's also a human health crisis that has for a long time been going on, but no one really has been able to bring out the impacts that it has really had on these local traders, local communities, local fisher folks?
Yeah, Helen, that one is a mouthful. I like how you go in detail and also expose the connections between the fossil fuel industry and fashion as well. And basically another form of colonization, because why are you dumping all the stuff on us, right? While in your countries you're promoting green fashion, this, that, and the other, you forget all of this that you bring and dump on us. And this segues very well into our next speaker, which is Lazola Kati, who is with us at the Fossil Ad Ban campaign. And right now, we want to see what is the connection with fashion's fashion, and also like its carbon footprint, and also what oil companies are trying to do on the continent generally. So Lazola, I would like you to speak to how through the Fossil Ad Ban campaign you've confronted greenwashing, which is being perpetuated by oil and gas giants, and what lessons can the fashion industry learn from that type of advocacy?
Yeah. Hi guys. Oh, that's a big question. So, first of all, I'm just going to give a very brief background on the Fossil Ad Ban campaign and then shoot into your question. So, essentially, the Fossil Ad Ban campaign is a campaign under Fossil Free South Africa that is advocating for there to be introduced in South Africa a fossil fuel advertising ban that's going to limit that's going to actually stop the perpetuation of greenwashing, but of fossil fuel companies. Because essentially, what we found through research is that fossil fuel companies, together with sustainable fashion, I guess big four companies, perpetuate the most amount of greenwashing, particularly in the ad space. We did release a report last year that basically we took into account and we did research on the top 6 petroleum companies in the country. For 2 months, we actually picked up that 15.3 million plus rands was spent on greenwashing ads. We also did pick up that over 30.9 million people were exposed to this greenwashing. Now, research has shown that an exposure to just 30 seconds of an advert, a greenwashing advert, can change the perception of any consumer. So if you already feel negative about a fossil fuel company, let's say Shell, particularly because Shell has been a pain in the backs of South Africans and coastal communities. So if you already feel like Shell is taking advantage of communities and the coastal line of South Africa, just 30 seconds of exposure to a greenwashing ad, you will actually feel more positive about Shell. So these are the dangers of greenwashing, because then it masks up the environmental, the human, and basically the future sort of degradation that fossil fuel companies bring into play. So moving on to answering Knox's question, how we have battled, or rather how we're still battling when it comes to greenwashing and fossil fuel companies, is basically through research, understanding the language. The language that is used by companies, and I don't want to limit only to oil companies, but companies that basically perpetuate greenwashing. The language is very eco-friendly. It's talking about, we did highlight some of the themes in our report. So it's talking about development, how fossil fuel investment is development. It's talking about how fossil fuel companies, or these companies, care about human beings. It's language that makes you feel you can relate to these companies. And this is where the problem begins, because these companies perpetuate climate change on a daily basis, but come back to us and say, hey, recycle, and we've invested in this recycling project. So we are for sustainable development. So you can buy from us, and it's great. You see, we're all nodding because we're all seeing where the lie actually starts from. So how we've basically tried to tackle it is through pushing with the advertising regulatory body of South Africa to open up the space so that there can be greenwashing complaints. This is how we launched South Africa's first greenwashing complaint against Total Energies and ended up winning, right? Right now, the fight is to pass a fossil ad ban at a national level. Secondly, it's to expand the definition of greenwashing. Particularly, it's going to be very helpful even with the fast fashion industry, because right now it just speaks to a greenwashing definition that limits companies only to not perpetuating false claims on renewable energy and carbon emissions reduction. But we wanted to include the imagery that was spoken about by earlier speakers. We wanted to include the claims to care about the environment, the claims to care about humanity, so that when there is proof that is put on the table, like the report that Greenpeace published, then there can be proof on the table that says greenwashing has been perpetuated because human life is not at risk, labor is not at risk, employment is not at risk. Yeah, so I'll stop there before I start preaching.
Thank you, Les. And you are right on time for me. I'm running a little behind, but I do want to open for some questions. So if we have Zandi, can you help me just note 2 to 3 hands of anyone who has a question or a comment for our speakers before Zoom also tries to kick us out, and we also want to respect your time. So I'm just gonna open for 2 to 3 hands. Anyone with a hand, a question, a comment, please indicate to us within the next minute. Seems like we've been clear. I'm not seeing any hands at the moment. I'm seeing a comment, so I'll just share that comment. Sarah has shared the article about the 7 sins of greenwashing if anyone wants to look at it. I see Safia has a hand. Christy just wanted to say just a big thank you for a highly informative session. I'm going to take closing remarks from all our speakers. In a minute, everyone gets to say something. So I'll start with you, Safia, because you already have a hand.
Sorry, thanks. I was just going to say if there were no questions, I just wanted to make a comment because I think what Helen spoke about the health issues around, the impacts of fashion waste. I think there's still more research we need to do around the health implications of fast fashion on human life and quality of life. I know there's been some stuff around the microplastics are finding, in people's like placentas and things like that. So, and I think that, the food industry has done some really great work around greenwashing and consumer protection and really regulating it so that we can be conscious of what we're putting into our bodies. But at the same time, clothing is something that's also on our bodies and it has that intimate relationship and should follow similar regulations. And so I think we can learn a lot from the food industry around how can we make this industry more regulated so that we can protect people's health at the same time. So that was just something I wanted to connect because I think that that's something we can often forget sometimes. But other than that, I think this has been a really great starting point for a conversation. I think there's a lot more we could still discuss, and we didn't even get into some of the further links around what are those complexities around how much the fashion industry contributes towards carbon emissions and is reliant on fossil fuels from the fabrics to distribution to the way that our clothes are made, the way that dyeing takes place. There's just so much more. And so I think like the work that we do is really important in trying to like bring some of these gaps to light, but then again, taking it forward and how can we collaborate together as citizens to act on these changes. Thank you for bringing us together.
Tegan, one line that says the message that you want out there right now.
Yeah, I guess I'll just echo what Safia said. Also, whenever Safia speaks, I take notes. I think she's just so brilliant. I got my notebook out. But yeah, I just as I said, echo that this should be a starting point, and essentially, I would want this to be, the momentum to continue, and for all the guests here to really, wherever you are in your journey with fashion, to really engage with with your peers about sustainable fashion. And like I said in the beginning, you are a person with influence. At least there are influences, and then there is influence, and as a person you have influence over your friend group and your peers and your family. So be an advocate for it. As we've discussed today, it's not frivolous, it's not just silly fashion, it's human rights issues, it's health issues, and that's the core of it. So yeah, I would just encourage everyone to be an advocate for fashion being more than just clothing.
Thank you, Tegan. Sarah, one line to end it off.
Yeah, I think the goal is not to, completely disregard fast fashion businesses that operate in the global market or the media, but, rather to promote better informed decisions among businesses and companies to ensure that they operate with more intention and care. So if companies want to sell their products like fast fashion brands, that they disclose factual information through their marketing rather than greenwashing, ones that actually align with their business practices. And if they genuinely aim to shift from the linear model to the circular model, then they would avoid making vague, sweeping statements through greenwashing tactics. And similarly, it does not advocate, for the individual consumer to seize their purchasing decisions altogether, but rather to make them more aware or conscious of the reality of deceptive marketing and the effects of the fast fashion industry. So yeah, I think we can all do our part, but also not limiting yourself to sit only a consumer and thinking of yourself in another light that will help amplify your role.
Thank you, Sarah. Helen.
Thank you for having me. First of all, and I think, yeah, all these speakers are super brilliant, and we can all work together, to end the addiction of big fashion brands, the addiction to overproduction and overconsumption that has led us to where we are right now. I believe we've barely scratched the surface, so I think a part 2 will be needed. Thanks.
Lazola.
Thanks. I just wanted to echo everyone's sentiments. Definitely, we do need a part 2. There's a lot that we could delve deeper into, and I look forward to us collaborating together. I think there's a lot of literature that could come out of just this discussion. But going forward, let us try to just debunk greenwashing. Let's raise awareness. Let's see where we can fight. And let's never forget to not do it in silos. Well, we work it works better when we're all united. Yeah.
Thank you so much to my amazing panel. You guys have been so great. And as you've said, we've barely scratched the surface, and we need part 2s and 3s and other ways that we can continue to do this work. I just want to really thank you for all your amazing insights. To our guests who joined us today, thank you so much for lending us your time and your ears. I think you can look up each of the speakers so that you can find their work. I'll see if we can do a follow-up post also that can have some links to the stuff that we spoke about, so that when we meet for a part 2, we are delving deeper into that. I think this was also just to establish the work and get it going. And we love what we have here. It's been brilliant voices all around. And I really enjoyed talking to all of you today. So yeah, from my end, I just want to echo something that was raised by one of the learners. We did a greenwashing workshop with some high school children in Cape Town recently. And one of the learners had raised how, they'll tell you that a t-shirt that you're wearing is sustainable, but they don't tell you about how much fossil fuel was burnt to get it transported from where it came from to here. And I found that insight to be very conscious, right? To say that maybe the production of it was great, but somewhere in the supply chain, something wrong was done. So don't come to me and tell me that this is sustainable fashion. So yeah, I think let's make it more than just a trend to speak about sustainability. We need to make it the truth, and fight all the deception that's currently happening in the greenwashing space. I think it's been shared in our chat. As the Fossil Ad Ban campaign, we have a Fossil Ad Ban pledge that we are asking anyone who supports anti-greenwashing work, whether it's by oil and gas companies or fashion companies, to take the pledge. The amazing thing that's been happening is that we've been having creative industry members who are the ones who become the mouthpiece of these organizations, whether it's a fashion brand or an oil company, who are the ones who craft the messaging. We've had them also sign on to this pledge, and we're looking at the work from the perspective of also including people who are doing the storytelling on behalf of these brands. So hopefully in our next one, we can have someone from that space as well to speak to how conscious storytelling can be done and can start from them within the creative industry. Otherwise, thank you so much for all your time. I'm super grateful. We'll be seeing you next time. I am signing out. Thank you, everyone. Good night. This evening, as we unpack this very important topic, today